All right, returning and back to this. In the last session, I was talking about the preview modes. Okay, so I think we're good enough. We're good for there. I think we can leave that. And I was also showing you the 8x8 blocky calc. I think that's pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this back to the video preset, and I'm going to recalc full size now. All right, so I'm in pretty good shape. I'll tell you what. Let's do 800. Nothing is saying that I have to use these presets. It's easy enough for me anyway to go up here and just punch in what I want, or I could use the preset. Now keep in mind the preset will also allow you to test out different scenarios for these quality settings, and that's what we're going to talk about now. All right, so we talked about the DE stop. I think you have a really good handle on that. DE stands for distance estimate, and it is the point at which the ray, let's make a Mandelbulb object here. It's a point at which the ray will stop so that it doesn't overshoot. When it overshoots, it's called overstepping or oversampling, and you tend to get white pixels or maybe black. If it overshoots an object, all right, a Mandelbulb object, all right, if it overshoots it and goes off into Never Never Land, all right, that's okay. That is a ray that has been goes off to eternity, and it's not calculated to be anything other than, well, transparency or nothingness. So the whole idea behind ray tracing, often referred to as ray marching, is to find the point at which the ray, all right, this ray is really a mathematical concept, the ray hits the object. Now the DE stop will say, hey, stop a little bit sooner, so that you don't risk going past it, okay? That's the DE stop. Now, okay, all right, let's do this. Let's get up our little whiteboard here. Let's pick a color here. I will call it black. Let's put in our Mandelbulb object. Okay. Let's make red a ray. Now, you know, if a ray shoots off like that, as I just spoke about, hey, I got a straight line out. That's pretty cool. I don't know how I did that. Usually my lines are all, anyway. Okay, so there's no object, and so that particular ray, it says, okay, well, there's nothing there. It shoots off another ray, and okay, and it says, aha, so here is an object. And then, of course, this is all math now, and so in the software, it's calculating out, okay, that ray hits something. Now the DE stop, all right, this is just in review, says, look, stop here. All right, stop. Stop before you get to the object so that we don't risk oversampling. And oversampling would be that we would actually go too far. Let's get back to red here. We go too far. All right, and we're actually and this way that particular ray does not represent where that object is. It represents something else, which is wrong. We don't want that kind of wrongness. All right, so that's your DE stop. Now, okay, now let's put another object way off here in the distance, okay? And we have a ray that eventually shoots out to here. Now that didn't give me a straight line, so I don't understand this. Okay, anyway. Now we have the same earths there. I mean, that can overshoot too, okay? But here's what we do. With this particular very DE stop on FOV, and if that is checked on, what that does is it says, look, if you have a field of view, which is very wide, let's see if we can get it blue here. Let's make that our field of view, like that. Oh man, look at it. Look how bad that is. That's my field of view. That's as good as it's going to get. All right. So what this thing says is that vary the DE stop value based upon your field of view. All right, and if that's just, it's just an on or off check. So if it's checked on, the DE stop on a big field of view here would be modified so that you get a more so you get a less accurate DE stop on objects that are out in the scene when you have a field of view that's very large, a very large field of view. Okay. You don't need highly accurate DE stops when all your objects in the scene here tend to be small and very detailed. So this particular DE stop might be perfectly fine for a field of view that is narrow. All right, so let's take a field of view that might be narrow, like that. Okay. But a wider field of view, we're asking with this option right here, we're asking the software to slightly modify the DE stop internal to its software algorithm, because the field of view is wider. So, and I'm just guessing the smaller objects in a very wide field of view probably would not need as tight of a DE stop. So a DE stop might be set right here. There's my straight line again. I don't know how this thing is magic. All right, so what this does, what this DE stop does, I'm sorry, what the vary DE stop on FOV means is that the software will automatically adjust the DE stop value internal. It does not adjust it out here. It doesn't change your setting. Internally, it will adjust the DE stop when your field of view is wider and calls for a less accurate DE stop. If you're too accurate, even if you get field of view is very wide, let's say, and you've got a lot of small objects out there, and your DE stop is too close, you're going to get oversampling, and then you get a whole bunch of noise, overstepping, oversampling, way out there, way off there in the distance. So when your field of view is wider, this very DE stop on FOV will compensate for the wider field of view, and internally make an adjustment to help with the DE stop functionality. All right. Now let me summarize that particular feature by saying this. Yeah, leave it on. Leave it on. I have a fairly wide field of view here in the application, the project that we're working on. Yeah, I want to leave that on. I want to leave that on. But if I had if let's see, over in my navigator, all right, pull the parameters over. I don't need that darkness there. All right, so let's just say that I was to, let's see, I had a very wide field of view, but if I was to make that like 90, all right, so the internally with this option checked on, it would actually try to help me in varying the DE stop so that I didn't have a problem with oversampling or overstepping when my field of view has been much more narrow. All right, so rule of thumb is I leave it on. It doesn't hurt anything. I have never seen any degradation in the quality. I leave it on. So rule of thumb number 1 is leave the vary DE stop on FOV on unless you find that there's a whole bunch of noise in there, white dots, all right, overstepping, oversampling, and you pop that off to see if it improves your situation any. I leave it on by default. All right, we'll carry on in the next session. I'll see you there.